Hello there and a very warm welcome to the weekly review where we dissect some of the biggest stories in Hong Kong and abroad over the last 7 days. I'm Britt Clennett. Coming up on this week's show. End of an era. The curtain finally closes on Mong Kok's 18-year-old pedestrian zone. The battle over Sai Ying Choi Street's future sparks a larger debate about public space in the city. And later in the show, as the US adopts more protectionist policies, Los Angeles Mayor and presidential hopeful Eric Garcetti tells us his city is open for business. And joining us on the show today is Andy Yu, a Civic Party District Councillor for the Yau Tsing Mong District. Andy, welcome to the show. I'm looking forward to getting your take on that pedestrian zone in just a moment. All right, well, first up tonight, it was a standout feature of Mong Kok, a pedestrian zone where performers from all over Hong Kong would go to display their talents. But after almost 2 decades, the Mong Kok pedestrian zone has now closed down. As soon as the clock struck 10 p.m, police moved in to clear the buskers and spectators. Workers pulled out any signs that marked it a car-free zone. Police vans drove into the street to allow the traffic in. And with that, the zone was history. Well, although the plan to scrap it had already been in the works since back in May, when the Yau Tsing Mong District Council took action after mounting noise complaints. Our reporter Lydia Sung looks into how this once bustling part of Kowloon came to its bitter end.
Passionate singers performing to joyful crowds. Just a few hours before the curtain officially comes down on this 18-year-old pedestrian zone, the street performers of Sai Ying Choi Street South dazzle the crowd for one last time. For most people, it's bittersweet.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I'm glad I was able to perform here a final time. But I'm also sad we've lost a venue for people to showcase their talents.
I can't feel the pain of the residents here, probably because I don't live here. But as an outsider, I think that's a lot of value in this place.
It's a place with a lot of memory for me.
For some performers, like Andrew So, it's been a long time coming. The 58-year-old, known also as Mr. Funny, was once a regular busker in Mong Kok as well. 8 years ago, he won a landmark lawsuit against the government after he was accused of obstructing public areas. That victory, though, according to the artist, came at a price. It then meant anyone, even those without any talent, could come to perform.
It's become lawless since. Buskers would compete for a spot there and try to drive each other out of the zone. There was no respect. People no longer had the mentality of sharing the space with one another, and this led to a decline in the quality of the performances there.
Chan Siu Tong was one of the councillors behind the decision to scrap the performing zone. He said he has received countless noise complaints from Mong Kok residents over the years.
Performers only talked about the positivity they brought about. They think they're popular with Hong Kongers because they've got audience, but they weren't willing to compromise on noise or other disturbances. They only said they would try.
Interestingly, Chan was actually one of the politicians who initiated the zone. Today, he's responsible for scrapping it.
Looking back now, we walked into a trap. We set up the zone, but then we failed to study the necessary regulations to manage it.
If the government has the sincerity and willpower, it should try to restore order there, or at least be proactive in rebuilding a similar zone like this.
Residents and officials scrapped the zone for the sake of peace and quiet. Now, without the performances and the crowds they attracted, the street certainly is more quiet now. The question is, did the area lose its charm and character too? Some critics have gone as far to say it's just another example of Hong Kong losing its cultural pizzazz and a government that isn't doing enough to preserve it. Lydia Song, ViuTV News.
Andy, you're also a member of the Yau Tsing Mong District Council. Did you vote for the scrap?
Actually, in that meeting, I vote for abstain.
You abstained?
Yeah, because I think I cannot vote yes, because I just think if kill it altogether. It doesn't solve the problem completely. It's just moving the problem, no matter the noise pollution or the problem of Bossing Road, moving to the other district, because the street performer also exist here, and they need to find some new location for them. Therefore, I don't think if just clearly to kill it altogether, that is very good solution.
And I want to get to perhaps some government pitfalls in this situation in a little bit. But first of all, I think I need to speak on the behalf of many people in Hong Kong who live in crowded, noisy places. Is this kind of a fair call that all they wanted was some peace and quiet?
Yeah, that's why I can I fully understood that the people especially living in Mong Kok, Sai Yuen Choi Lam Street, they suffering from the noise pollution or the problem of Bossing Road over 18 years. Therefore, I understand and I agree the government should do something for them, but also the street performer.
Right, so you said that perhaps killing it all together wasn't a solution. I want to take a quick listen to what Chow Sil Tong, one of your colleagues, had to say on the matter.
如果真係得嘅話，唔使等18年啦。
If it had been possible to just regulate it without killing it, we wouldn't have to wait for 18 years. Back in 2002, the District Council was already talking about how the government can keep tabs on it. But there has never been any sort of legalization. It was all talk. I don't believe the government will make any move to come up with solutions unless it's shut.
Do you agree with what he had to say? Could something else perhaps could have been done, or is this a case of the government perhaps not being too lazy in coming up with a solution, not thinking of creative solutions to problems such as this?
I quite agree with his say, because the government can do more, actually. For example, we just propose some regulation system or the license system for the government to consider for the street performer in the future. Because if the government do nothing for the street performer, the problem still happen again, or will moving on to other district. But for the Hong Kong, the street art or the street performer, we can't find the way out.
So you're saying that the government hasn't come up with creative solutions to the problem, that perhaps they've been a little bit laissez-faire when it comes to this pedestrian zone in particular. There are other areas where performers can perform freely, such as TST, the pier there. Is that something that you advocate for?
Yeah, that is worry about that. And I think maybe living in Tsim Sha Tsui, the resident in Tsim Sha Tsui, they also worry about that, because if the problem just moving to the Tsim Sha Tsui, more worry about that is the Causeway Bay. Also, maybe the next station will the street performer will go there. And as a result, the noise pollution and the Bossing Road problem will still continue.
Are these areas just kind of not conducive for street performing? And then does it kind of open up to this question of, is Hong Kong really conducive for street performing? Actually,
I don't think we are not welcome to the street perform or the street art, but
you're saying that, but where do they go then? And if you're not creating areas for them to go, then they might feel that they should just give up entirely.
Exactly. I just want to say the location is important. I think no matter for the government, also for the public, we should consider where the location is good or suitable for street perform. Maybe it need to require you need to fulfill several requirements. Maybe the location should far away from the resident, or maybe take some location far away from the resident area. And other, maybe we need to do the public consultation. Then we can get more people's support and the agreement.
Right, and is this something that the Yau Tsing Mong District Council is going to invest in? Perhaps more time, more money into really looking into a proper regulation system?
Actually, but the point is that the government didn't want to do the regulation. Actually, I just proposed many times to the government, tell them if you can do the regulation, then it can set a very good balance between to the street performer or the public. No matter the take an example, maybe take the West Kowloon cultural district an example. Then that is a very good example to the government can learn it from the history. Right. Then. Also have a room for the street performer.
And perhaps this is a good place to start to really gather public opinion on the issue. Thank you very much for your time, Andy Yiu. Well, now that the Mong Kok pedestrian zone is gone, many performers there are already saying they will carry on with their shows near the Tsim Sha Tsui Pier. Now, the area has always been popular with buskers. Our reporter Lydia Sung went there with Samson Wong, a lecturer at the Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts. Now, she asked whether the fight for public performing space in the city signals a much bigger problem.
That's not just only a problem for busker. There's a general culture of our low level of tolerance in the public space, that a lot of activities are not allowed.
Now here I'd like to broaden out the conversation a little bit. When it comes to engaging the general public in arts and culture, say street performances, how are we doing, especially when compared with other countries? And whose responsibility is it to take the lead and work on it, you think?
I think there's a long-standing culture of a very tightly regulated public space in Hong Kong, that public space are not truly public. So I think the chief responsibility not only comes from the government, who have to endorse a policy that nurture truly public space. It also comes from the general public, that we have to rethink how we should conceive questions about hygiene and publicness or negotiation among different stakeholders.
Now that we have lost such a signature street performance hub at the heart of Kowloon, what's next? What's next for performers? What's next for audiences?
I think we should avoid thinking that performers should be confined to specific sites or locations. Instead, we should take the case of Mong Kok to rethink about how we can accommodate more different kinds of activities, including performances. I think for the street to have a vibrant street culture, we should accommodate these in order to have some kind of mechanism to solve the tension brought about by them.
All right, stay with us. There's plenty more to come on the show. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti tells us all about navigating the rocky trade landscape and hints that he may be running for the 2020 presidential race. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back. As promised, time to hear from the Mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti. He's been in Hong Kong on a trade mission this week. In a wide-ranging interview, he spoke to Joel Larby about his presidential ambitions and how Hong Kong and LA can keep doing deals in a rocky climate.
Mayor Garcetti, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
What brings you to Hong Kong as part of this business delegation?
You know, Hong Kong and Los Angeles are twins. We are coastal cities with mountains meeting the sea, diverse populations, incredibly innovative economies, and much of the world's trade. If you actually combine this metro area and LA metro area, it's about 1.7% of global GDP. So we know that you know, even when there's choppy waters, relationships are everything. We are regularly here promoting tourism, trade, and investment, and we see really good days ahead. Despite some of the headwinds today, we think that making that investment now culturally, economically, politically is really important for us to do, to have two great cities continue to prosper.
Because looking at the numbers here, Hong Kong is trading partner 6 for LA and China #1, but interestingly, the mainland is not somewhere where you're visiting this time.
This time not. I've been numerous times to the mainland. We have our sister city Guangzhou, where we've established even deeper ties than ever. Been in Beijing and Shanghai repeatedly. But this was a time that had come at the expense of Hong Kong the last couple trips, so this time I wanted to come back here and really say that we're here, we're ready, we're excited to continue to expand that sort of cooperation on smart cities, the environment, global trade and culture as well.
So what can the two cities learn from each other, LA and Hong Kong?
So much. I mean, first of all, how to manage a diverse population, how to build an infrastructure when, you know, we're very popular cities. And then we come here to look at some of the great work that's being done here to continue to have an open economy, low taxes, great entrepreneurialism, and Hong Kongers might not feel it, but the investments that you've made in housing and in transportation are something that I always look to and learn from.
You've picked an interesting time, though, to come to Asia. You've been to Japan, you've been to Vietnam, you've been to South Korea, now Hong Kong. What are those countries saying to you when it comes to this trade war? Because obviously LA is right in the middle of this storm.
I think they're beginning to see that rhetoric isn't enough. You need to have results. There's fair questions to raise, and nobody faults, I think, our president or anybody else for raising them. But if you just ratchet things up and can't actually produce any outcomes, real outcomes, not ones that are self-declared victories, but to see us, for instance, double the number of businesses that export, or to invest in alternative energy, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, semiconductors, the way China very impressively is doing that, how will we compete for the future? We want to be engaged in the world. LA just recently won the Olympics, and my pitch was, you know, remind us how important the world is by coming to Los Angeles. But that's not a lesson LA needs to learn. We have 224 languages spoken, largest populations of dozens of countries outside their homeland in LA. So global culture is our local culture, and that's what's made us, I think, so successful. That's something I'd like to see the rest of America prosper from as well. But building walls and building barriers make it very difficult for that prosperity to get to the middle part of our country too.
But it's near inevitable, though, isn't it, that business is going to be affected, both LA, Hong Kong, LA, China, LA, anywhere in Asia. There is going to be some impact that's felt.
Well, that's our message, first of all, is that we want folks in Asia to know that in Los Angeles, as Americans, we want to see these issues resolved because we depend on that trade. We depend on that investment in tourism. We estimate that as much as 20% of our, for instance, cargo container trade may be affected in the Port of LA, the largest in the Americas. That means real jobs in my city. Those are people who depend on that. The price of steel already going up because of tariffs endangers some of our construction projects, the timelines and the costs. We have a ton of momentum, so I'm not worried yet that this will cause some sort of turning back or a recession, but this is how recessions start. This is how, you know, conflict escalates. And so it's very incumbent upon us to continue to show our own leaders domestically that a lot of Americans depend on this relationship for their well-being, and vice versa, that our strategic relationships are stronger when we're engaged together instead of pulling apart. And I think people to people can always be powerful for national leaders.
It seems as though the left hand doesn't really know what the right hand is doing when it comes to federal-state relationships there. Is protectionism working then in that case?
We want to see fair trade. That's a reasonable discussion to have. And there's a lot of discussions we haven't had in decades about protectionism that exists not just in other countries, but even in the United States. That's important. But if you don't have a strategy for the outcome, if you don't have a framework within to negotiate that, this can be incredibly destructive. You know, trade wars are like regular wars. People start wars thinking they're going to make big gains, and by the end, everybody realizes with the loss of life and everything else that everybody has lost. And the same thing will happen in a trade war. So I agree with you that especially for our smaller American communities, or for farmers, for instance, who maybe today are getting a subsidy from the Trump administration to make up for loss of market, they don't want a subsidy. They don't want to live off of government welfare. They want to sell their goods. And I think that capitalism works best when we can promote that and allow people to stand on their own 2 feet.
There are some commentators that are saying that maybe he has a point, particularly when it comes to China, which does operate with a fairly protectionist national policy. If America adopts the same, then you're fighting equally in the same war there. Do you share that view at all?
I think it's perfectly reasonable. I mean, we represent Hollywood, for instance, and intellectual property has been very important to us, and we haven't seen those protections in China that we need to see to protect a product that may not be physical, but it's digital and very important to jobs in my city. So I do embrace those conversations. It is time to update them. But when you start with guns blazing before you even sit down, it seems to be a backwards approach. And I think when pride or ego comes in, how do you unwind that? And how do you come to resolution? It's a high-stakes negotiating ploy. I would rather see us make those conversations happen in a much more engaged, respectful, and responsible way.
Forgive me for saying this, but that sounds a tad presidential itself. Is there 2020 in sight for Eric Garcetti?
I don't know is the honest answer. I've said I'm looking at it, and I will decide sometime in the early part of next year. But I hope anybody who is as worried as I am about the relationship between America and the world, as well as the promises to our own American people that have been unfulfilled, we'll look at what we can do to change the White House. I don't think that we have a president right now who is delivering for American workers, American communities, and doesn't have much of a strategy of investing in the future. You know, I don't dismiss everything that Donald Trump has done as a president. It's important, I think, for us to have a unified country, but he is dividing us. He's pointing fingers. He's telling people from certain ethnic groups to be against folks from other, on immigration, on global climate change. He's just been a very ineffective president. So I am taking an honest look at that, whether it's supporting somebody else or whether it's me getting in there. I think mayors have a different book of business. We have to solve real problems. We don't do it all perfectly, but potholes we pave, infrastructure we invest in. Los Angeles, we've raised our minimum wage, reduced our city's business tax, made community college free, and boosted the number of people in higher education. Those are real accomplishments and real challenges. Sometimes I feel like Washington has united us, but only against it. And for somebody who said he was going to clean up Washington, it seems to be, you know, swampier and swampier every day.
LA and Hong Kong, as you say, they share a lot of similarities, and there are some issues within Hong Kong that LA has gone through in the past. Hong Kong, of course, doesn't like to identify as being part of the Chinese mainland. It is its own standout city. LA has had its own identity crisis of sorts. Have these sorts of issues been things that you've come across in your time here? And what would you say to Hong Kong, particularly at a time where pro-independence is such a hot topic right now?
Look, I think people have to start with who they are, and both of our cities have had multiple countries' flags fly over them. They've been gateways to important continents. And I would say the strength is in being somebody who can bring people together. Hong Kong is the way to bring the world to China, in the same way that Los Angeles is the way to bring the world to the United States. We have a very strong, independent, and unique identity, but we also feel very proud of being Americans. And in this great Chinese city, I don't think you have to worry about Hong Kong having its own identity. To have a free press, to have a vibrant press is something that I'm always impressed by. This is one of the places where people will engage with you, ask you questions, civil society is strong, the economy is free, and I think that's something important to hang on to. If you look at China, that's increasingly where China has moved in terms of the openness of its economy, in fostering civil society. And so I'm sure there's plenty for China to learn from Hong Kong still, and plenty for Hong Kong to learn from China. It's a two-way street, and we do the same thing in LA. I always learn from America while we contribute to the greatness of our nation.
That was Joel Larby speaking to LA Mayor Eric Garcetti. Well, that's it for this edition of the Weekly Review. Do tune in again next week. Have a great night.